in 3 years that Formula One has raced in Canada. And well, what a race we ended up having. The Canadian Grand Prix 2022 is in the books, and shock horror, it's yet another win for Max Verstappen, and his lead on top or at the front of the championship standings has been extended once again because, well, his main rival, Charles Leclerc, could only manage a fifth place finish in what was, as I said, a pretty interesting race because, well, there was a lot of overtaking that was there to be seen. There was some interesting tire management. You saw a lot of subplots. There was, of course, even a late safety car that actually threatened Verstappen's chances of winning the race. But he ended up getting that race win in the end. So we are going to basically go over this race in a little bit of detail, just a bit of a lowdown for what happened. Obviously, the big talking point: Max Verstappen takes his first win in Canada. Mind you, this is the first time that he's managed to win at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. So obviously, big deal for him. In second place is Ferrari's Carlos Sainz, who most of us actually thought could have actually had a shot at winning the race, but as it turns out, couldn't quite get past Verstappen there at the end. And Max Supermax holds on for what was a very well-deserved victory because there was about 14 laps of pressure that he had to withstand from Carlos Sainz, who, lest we forget, had the DRS. Verstappen, being the first car out there, obviously did not have DRS to use as such. So he managed to hold off. Sainz in the end just couldn't find the little bit of extra pace needed, or whether it be getting out a better exit of the curbs. He couldn't find that little bit of extra pace. For Sainz, you have to feel just a little bit because for him it is indeed the curse of the seconds that has carried on. I mean, this is his fifth second place finish in his career. He's still not managed to get that maiden victory in F1, but all things said and done, I think he'd be happy with how his race went, considering the kind of bad luck as well as poor form that he was showing in the last few races. Another very noteworthy thing to happen from this particular race is a certain Lewis Hamilton getting only his second podium finish of the season. Yes, Lewis Hamilton, who, I need to remind you, started fourth on the grid, thanks largely due to a very good very good qualifying run on Saturday in the wet. Started fourth on the grid, ended up taking advantage of some serious pace later on, and is now getting his second podium of the season. It's a gentle reminder that his teammate George Russell already has 3. But George Russell, who by the way got tagged as Mr. Consistency after the last week, carries on his streak of finishing in the top 5 because he got a fourth place finish just behind his teammate. So all in all, and you guys know that I have a soft spot for Mercedes, so obviously going to reflect on this for a little bit. Very good race, very good weekend for the Silver Arrows. The qualifying could have been a little bit better because, of course, you remember they sent out George Russell and slicks in a bit of a gamble towards the end of Q3. Didn't work out. He could only start P8. But very, very good way to finish. The advantage that the Mercedes cars have is that they might not be the paciest, but they are reliable. So more often than not, if any of the rivals do end up having a bad day, they are there to pick up the scraps, and that is exactly what was happening here today as well. Because remember, Leclerc had to fight through the order, he had to fight through the grid, and he did struggle to actually get past Esteban Ocon for long stretches of the race. So he had to actually put in an epic run later on in the race to kind of try and get into the top 5, which he did manage. But of course, he wasn't at the forefront, which meant that the Mercedes could pick up the pieces. As for the other driver who could have potentially been up there, well, Sergio Perez ended up having a race to forget because he ended up having a bit of, I don't remember what exactly the issue was. It's probably a mechanical failure of some sort. And, he had to retire from the race. Again, actually, it's a bit of a concerning time for the Red Bull team, who would be wondering what exactly happened with Perez, that suddenly he ended up having that bit of a problem when it came to his finish, because he did, remember, he crashed out yesterday in qualifying. That was not something entirely in his control. This, however, well, he could have, there's nothing he could have done about it. So you have to feel a little bit for Perez. His brief idea of a title run is pretty much already, I think, if you ask me, done. But Max Verstappen looks like he's running away with the 2002 championship till this point. Again, as a lot of you guys are pointing out, as Love Rami points out, yes, 6 wins out of 9 this season for Max. he's going to take some stopping, and honestly, if you ask me, the only thing that can stop is if Ferrari actually get on top of their reliability issues, because they've been having them way too much. At this point, it's not even a tight race. Like, honestly, I miss 2021 where, Hamilton and Verstappen were going at each other's throats. I mean, no disrespect to Carlos Sainz, but after about 3-4 laps, even I kind of figured that he wasn't getting past Max. And even Max knew it. Max knew where exactly he was fastest. That was in the third sector of the lap. And that was when he was actually charging his battery and using his battery. At least that's what it seemed like to me. And also the fact that, that was the place where he was getting the best DRS release. But without the DRS, Sainz didn't look like getting anywhere near Verstappen. Verstappen had this in control, and that's the difference between a racer who's won 20 odd Grand Prix compared to a racer that's won none. They know how it is to close out results, and that's exactly what Verstappen did. So fair play to him in that regard. I know a lot of us would have been excited if, a certain Fernando Alonso, who, remember, started the race in second, would have ended up getting a podium finish. Wasn't to be, unfortunately, because, he did very well in the rainy conditions yesterday, but I think even they knew that their car wasn't going to be fighting even the Mercs. At best, they might have been able to fight the Mercs, but I don't think that was exactly going to be on plan either. To make things worse, his engine was suffering a few issues later in the race, so he only managed a P7 finish behind his teammate Esteban Ocon, who took a pretty neat P6 finish behind Charles Leclerc, who finished in 5th. And a good race for both Alfa Romeos. I mean, they've been having some struggles in recent times, particularly with retirements. So Valtteri Bottas finishes in 8th, Zhou Guanyu in 9th, and the final point was taken by Canada's very own Lance Stroll, who himself had a pretty interesting race. If you guys would remember, he started the race, he went very long on his first stint, only ended up changing tires later on, and then he had to overtake a certain Daniel Ricciardo towards the end of the race to get into that points finish. But I think biggest talking points, if you're looking at from this race, Red Bull would be very happy, because despite the fact that Perez ended up not finishing the race, Verstappen won the race. He's extended his lead atop the Drivers' Championships. Remember, Charles Leclerc, his closest rival, could only manage a P5. And while a P5 is not bad, given that he started from the back of the grid, you can't help but feel that if he was starting from the front, maybe this would have been something more of a fight. As such, not really much of a fight. Second place finish for Carlos Sainz spares Ferrari some of the blushes and actually kind of salvages their weekend in a way, because recent times, especially considering how bad Baku was, where there was a double retirement for the Scuderia, they take second and fifth because it shows that they're at least temporarily on top of whatever issues it is they had. Of course, remember, Leclerc had to take an all-new power unit, so how well that power unit holds up as the races pile up is what would be worth watching, because remember, it was, most people suspected that it was overuse of the Ferrari engine, or overdoing it in terms of turning up the modes, that led to it actually kind of disintegrating and not being as reliable as it probably should be. But again, that's something that we'll only know with time. As things stand, P5 finish for Leclerc, probably the best we could have hoped for given the circumstances. And of course, as Lavrami was very clearly mentioning out, lit performance by Mercedes. Yes, I'm very, very happy that they managed to get, that Hamilton managed to get a podium. I think he's been racing pretty well in recent times. That's probably not been reflecting in the results, but he did do very well in Canada, which, as we all know, is a circuit he loves. This where he got his first win back in 2007, so he would be very happy with the podium finish. And yes, Piyush Palaban, I think you would be hard pressed to find anyone who manages to make this argument that Max is indeed among one of the best drivers in the grid. And as Lavrami points out, that Ferrari, every time they tend to mess things up. And that in the last race, Leclerc did exactly what Checo did today. Yeah, Ferrari seriously need to look after their car. I agree with you, because if they don't get on top of their reliability issues, then they are not going to be competing for the title, no matter how fast that car is. As that old saying goes in F1, that to finish first, you have to first finish. And they did manage to finish today, but as I pointed out, they had to take a new power unit for Leclerc. How well that holds up, that remains to be seen. And yeah, I do agree, Lavrami, that would be a bit disappointing for Alonso, but I don't think he was really going to be finishing on the podium in a dry race. The Alpine just doesn't have the pace. And yeah, as you point out, I think they'd be pretty happy with 6-7 finish, get both the points in the bag, do well enough to hold on to wherever they are it is in the Constructors Championship. Spurs Gulati, if you're just joining us, Sainz Jr. finished in second place. He was hunting down Max Verstappen in the lead, especially after that late safety car did indeed give him a bit of a chance. Remember, the late safety car, he got a cheap pit stop, and then he was behind Verstappen with fresher tires. But Verstappen held him up. And yes, Piyush, as you point out, Alonso did also have an engine issue, so I think that did compromise his race to an extent. And of course, I think their strategy could have been just a little bit better by Alpine. I think they were trying to run too deep on tires that just weren't going to make it that far. But again, that's something that they, I'm sure, will figure out in the race debrief. But for now, I mean, Canada has always been one of those tracks I've enjoyed watching racing on, because it's always been an eventful race. I mean, who can forget, I think 2011, where you had an insane race with so many pit stops. And, generally speaking, the circuit de Gilles Villeneuve has always been one of my personal favorite circuits. It's just one where I enjoy watching the racing. Nice little backdrop, good circuit for, it's a good little circuit for overtaking. It has its technicalities. So I personally was very glad that we were going to be returning to Canada after 3 years now. 2019 was the last race that was held. So I'm very happy with, how it is that, this race ended up going. Next up, as Love Rami rightly points out in the comments, we have Silverstone in 2 weeks. So again, the British track is always also one of those tracks which I enjoy watching. Very high speed, good for racing. And Sparsh, just to answer your question, I do watch football and I do talk a lot of football. You can check out our other videos where we've done football related stuff. You will see me up there somewhere, just to answer your question. But for now, the focus is on winding this up and on, of course, looking forward to what should be an interesting, next part of the season that, now that you would have cars who all have their own problems, except maybe the Red Bulls. The Mercedes cars, again, I must point out, despite them not always being that great in qualifying, generally speaking, do have some degree of race pace, and they are reliable to the point that they've not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, they've not had a single DNF this season that has been mechanically caused. So I think that's also a good thing. It would be interesting to see how it is that, the race goes in Britain. Again, Silverstone, very different track compared to the circuit Gilles Villeneuve, but that's 2 weeks from now. I'm very excited about that. I hope you guys are, and I also hope that you guys join us, or specifically me, when it is time for that particular race. For now, I'm going to take your leave because, well, it is 1:24 at night and I need a little bit of sleep because tomorrow is also going to be a big day. Yes, Ikpreet, you're welcome. And for every one of you guys, we cover all sports because we love all sports. It's that simple. So I'm winding this up for now. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you like what it is that we do, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, drop us a comment. We love reading your feedback. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, I'm Shane Dias. Good night. I will be with you guys very soon. Bye-bye.